Hello, I'm Sky Matsuhashi, founder of SmartPokerStudy.com, the place for poker players who are always striving to be better today than they were yesterday. Poker people, in case you missed it, in episode 112, I gave you my list of the 10 most powerful episodes of 2016, and if you missed a few along the way, go back, download, listen, and loin. Hey, poker people, it is the final podcast of the year, so we're closing out 2016 the right way with a new minimum effective dose episode. Yep, I know that you've been clamoring for more poker blind play knowledge, and here it comes. Oh, and by the way, just in case I don't say it later, Happy New Year, party people. Anywho, on to the pokers. So for an overview of this episode, in that prior class, number 1 of this blind play minimum effective dose, that was episode 110, in that episode I discussed the basics that you need to know to minimize your losses in the blinds. I covered making a pre-flop plan for post-flop play before you do anything pre-flop in the blinds, and I discussed the most common pre-flop leaks in the blinds and gave you ways to find them and fix them. So that was all, pre-flop stuff, but you need to have a good grasp on all of that before you listen to this episode. So, in Class 2 today, I'm hitting post-flop blind defense. We will discuss how to approach multi-way pots and heads-up pots, both when you flop strong hands and when you completely whiff the flop. I'll get into some great out-of-position post-flop defensive plays that you can make, and we'll dive into 3 post-flop leaks in the blinds and discuss how to find them and fix them. And in a future episode, Class 3 will cover blind v blind action. Please visit the show notes page for everything I discussed today, along with the screenshots of the different filters that I use to hunt for leaks. And you can go to the show notes at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod113. And while you are there, make sure you sign up for the weekly boost for exclusive poker strategy direct to that inbox. Alrighty, let's do it! Gambate!
And now for our feature presentation.
Alrighty, so this episode is all about post-flop blind defense, but to simplify things, we're going to make a few assumptions today, and I know that assumptions just makes an ass out of you and umptions, but we're going to do them anyway. So, assumption number 1 is we are out of position. And, we're making this assumption because we're in the blinds and blind v blind play will be discussed in class 3. Assumption number 2 is we made a pre-flop plan for post-flop play. We didn't willy-nilly button-click pre-flop. We made a 2-bet, a 3-bet, or we called or we checked with a plan in place for post-flop action. And assumption number 3 is because we're out of position and we had a plan, we are okay with playing this hand right now, out of position, post-flop. And this is a key assumption. We're not here because we didn't want to be. We chose to get in this position right here. So with these 3 assumptions in mind, you're going to encounter 2 basic post-flop situations, either seeing the flop multi-way or seeing it heads up. We'll start our discussion with the post-flop multi-way out of position action. So when it comes to being multi-way, first off, multi-way pots are simply any hand that gets to the flop with 3 or more players. So let's look at multi-way pots in 3 different ways. The first way, we'll just look at a general approach to multi-way pots. The second way is when you flop a strong hand, like a set or 2 pair, something to get value out of your opponent. And the third way that we'll look at multi-way is when you flop nothing or some kind of a draw. So first up here is the general approach to out-of-position multi-way pots. In these spots, it's really important to play solid post-flop poker because you're out of position. You need to be making good choices with reads, stats, and player tendencies to back up your plays. And of course, it's important to know that the more people that are in the pot, the more careful you need to be because, more people equals more landmines in this post-flop battle. But the good news is that you've probably got a tighter range full of strong and playable hands. Good pre-flop hand choices will give you easier post-flop decisions. So regardless of how well you hit the flop, there are 4 things that you need to consider before you act on your hand. The first thing is you need to consider the players who remain in the hand. So the more stationy they are, the less likely your bluffs are going to work. But the more value you may be able to extract from those stationy opponents. And the nittier they are, the more folds you'll get. Okay, so the second thing you need to consider is top pair hands are not so good versus 3 or 4 other players. The more players there are, the more more likely somebody hits something that they won't be folding, whether it's any type of draw, a set, or some two-pair kind of a hand. Be ready to ditch quote-unquote good hands like top pair when you face significant multi-way post-flop action. The third consideration is there's no need to fight for your pre-flop chips in the pot. That money is no longer yours. Say goodbye to it. It's generally okay to play fit or fold on the flop when you're out of position versus many players. You called for a good reason pre-flop, or you raised for a good reason as well, but the flop just didn't help you. You don't have to throw good money at bad situations. And the fourth consideration is you need to answer this question. How can I make money here? If you don't know how you're going to earn the pot now, you could just ditch early on the flop and get out cheaply. And here is the quote of the day from me. If you're flummoxed, don't flounder, just fold. Alrighty, so those were the general considerations for multi-way pots. Let's look at what you should think about when you flop that strong hand. So if you hit the flop hard, bet strong to limit the players that see the turn and to charge those draws. And another thing, you've got to consider the players who remain in the hand. Open limpers are definitely not good players and often very stationary, so you should try to extract the max value if any of those open limpers are in the pot with you. What you got to do really is bet versus those stations that will pay you off. And, I just now said bet when you flop a killer hand. But you don't need to go for 3 streets of value every single time. Pay attention to the way your opponents play the pot as well. If they raise, are they doing so with worse hands than yours? If they c-bet certain sizings, are they doing so as bluffs? If they're calling you down, could they be calling and not raising with a hand that actually beats you? You've got to put your hand reading skills to use to determine if your hand, even though it is a killer strong hand, you have to determine if it's still above their likely range. Or if their actions are telling you they've got a stronger hand and you need to ditch yours. Alright, so let's talk about flopping a marginal hand or a draw in multi-way pots. So marginal hands and draws, they're not really always worth continuing with. If the price you're being offered is right to call, keeping in mind that 2-2 rule, or if you're able to check and see a free turn card, that's great. But don't stick around just because you might hit your gut shot or your Jack 8 on that Jack Deuce 3 board might actually be good. And if you're going to bluff with a raise, the sooner you do so, the better. If you check call the flop with a plan to check raise the turn, you're risking loads more chips than if you would just check raise bluffed on the flop. As the pot builds, your bluffs are more costly. Alrighty, so let's get to some out of position heads up talk. It's situations like these where your post-flop skill should allow you to exploit your opponent's tendencies and either get the value that you're looking for or the fold that you're looking for. So first off, the general approach to heads-up play is basically the same as in multi-way pots, but you're dealing with only one opponent, which should allow you to use some of your more exploitive plays that are harder to pull off versus multiple opponents. When you're looking at those 4 considerations for multi-way play, we can tweak them a little bit for heads-up play. So the first consideration is, the player that you're up against. Stations will not fold, and they will give you value, and nits are just the opposite. Those lags and tag opponents, they can take a little bit more work, but use their stats against them and go with the plays that can really make things tough on them, and more on that in a little bit, making things hard with a little bit of aggression. So the second consideration is that top pair hands are pretty good versus one other player. And hand strength really is relative, and what could be weak in multi-way pots could easily be strength in heads-up pots. Don't just throw away your top pair weak kicker hands. Think about what hands your opponent is repping, their likely range, and how well it interacts with the board before you ditch those showdown-worthy top pair weak kicker, even second pair kind of hands. So consideration number 3 is that there is still no need to fight for your pre-flop chips that you already put in the pot. Now, that money is still no longer yours, so it's okay to ditch the hand if the situation is unfavorable. But when you are heads up, bluffs are easier to pull off. Just plan them according to the tendencies of your opponent. And if you think he won't fold to a bluff, no matter how big your bluff is, then just ditch the hand. If he's not folding, you're not bluffing. Keep that in mind. And the fourth consideration, and this is still a great question to ask yourself, is how can I make money here? Once again, if you don't know the answer, if you don't know how you're going to earn the pot, just ditch the hand. And here's that quote of the day again. If you're flummoxed, don't flounder, just fold. Okay, so some considerations when we flop a value hand heads up. When you hit the flop really strong, like maybe a set of ducks after calling pre-flop, you generally do not want to check raise. This gives the opponent the opportunity to ditch his extremely wide c-betting range. Check call instead, then check the turn with intent to raise, or just check call again. If the villain checks behind on the turn, that's okay. It's obviously not ideal, but you can still bet the river for some kind of value. And if your opponent is a station, go for maximum value. Maybe not bet as big as 80% or more, but, maybe you should at least bet out 67% pot, 2/3 pot, then increase it or decrease the sizing on future streets based on how likely you think the opponent will call. And if your opponent is the post-flop aggressor, he opened and then you called out of the blinds, maybe his aggression frequency is super high. You want to throw out that half-pot donk bet and hope for a raise. Just call the raise, then make a small turn bet. Keep firing until you take his stack or he decides to fold. And lastly, if you're up against a total post-flop nit, just check those super strong hands and hope that he bets or checks behind and maybe he catches something on the turn. Do not bet into foldy players on good flops. You don't want them to leave the hand too soon. You're trying to get value here after all. Alrighty, so those are the things to think about when you flop a strong hand in heads-up play. But now, let's move on to flopping a marginal hand or a draw in heads-up play. And as you all know, it often happens. You get to the flop and you completely whiff. Your heads up, out of position, so what do? Well, especially versus one opponent, there really are lots of ways that you can bluff with weak hands and weak draws. You can make check raises, donk leads, and of course, out of position floats. So we'll start with the bluff check raise first. When you check raise, you should size your bet to at least 2.5 times their c-bet, and you do this to make a re-raise very costly. If you min check raise, they can min 3-bet, and that has to work so less often, and it's still very profitable for them. So make your check raise a little bit bigger. And you don't want to check raise willy-nilly, though. I say willy-nilly a lot, but basically it just means you don't want to check raise randomly or unthinkingly or just any time. Don't check raise willy-nilly. Not all flops are equal, and not all hands are worth check raising. It's much better to check raise bluff when there are lots of turn cards that can add drawing equity to your hand. When you hit a card that gives you a better draw, you can fire the turn for lots of fold equity, and if you get called, there's still a chance you'll hit your draw on the river. But you do want to limit how often you make this play. The check raise isn't something you want to do every single time. It is great and it is profitable, but doing it too often will convince your opponents that you are a bluffing madman and they're going to look you up far too often, or just come over the top with a lot of 3-bets and you got to ditch your check raising hand, And also, if you make the check raise, but the opponent decides to call, and when the turn comes, it just does not help you at all, then you don't have to follow that up with a double barrel bluff. The situation went from a good chance or a good opportunity to check raise on the flop to a bad opportunity to continue barreling because the opponent had called and the turn doesn't help you. So it's a terrible situation now. Just don't throw more money at it. Save the chips and use them to pull off another one of these check raise bluffs in the future. Alrighty, next, let's get to the bluff a donk bet. So donk betting is a great way to throw off your opponents. Take a look at their fold to donk bet stat, and if it's high, somewhere above 50%, then this could be a profitable play on the flop. You could even make a delayed donk bet versus opponents who double barrel a lot. First, you check call the flop after timing down a little bit, and timing down makes it look like you are contemplating a check raise for value. Then on the turn, you throw out the delayed donk bet after timing down just a little bit. Your 2 time downs will look like you're contemplating going for value, and many opponents will ditch their hand at this point. But you want to know how often your donk lead needs to work and compare this to their fold to donk bet stat. So if you make a quarter pot bet, that only needs to work 20% as a complete bluff. A 1/3 pot bet needs to work 25%. Half pot bet is 33%. 2/3 pot bet needs to work 40% as a bluff, 3/4 pot bet 43%, and a full pot sized bet needs to work 50% of the time. And when your donk lead, if it gets called, he has likely just capped his range right there. If he had a really good hand, he would raise you for value. So his call indicates some sort of draw, maybe an underpair, or even a weak top pair hand. You can fire a second barrel on cards on the turn that just don't help his range. Okay, the final play to talk about is the flop out of position float. And this is a really interesting play that I use to really good effect, I just ran a filter in Poker Tracker 4 for this play, and over 64 instances of using it, I have a win rate of 451 big blinds per 100 hands. That's unbelievable. And out of those 64 instances, I only lost 6 hands total. So I've won a whopping 91% of those hands with this play. And wow, that is such a great success percentage right there. I'm definitely going to keep making this one, of course. Oh, and if you go to the show notes, you can see a screenshot of this filter to help you run it on your own. So here's how the flop out of position float works. You check call on the flop on boards that could hit your range. Like I said before, time down a little bit before you hit that call button to make it look like you're thinking about raising. On the turn, time down, then check. Hopefully he checks behind. Then, on the river, waste no time in donk leading. You want this bet to look like you were hoping to check raise him on the turn, but you missed your chance, so now the only way to get value is to bet out. And this play is extremely valuable against turn-honest players. If you find someone who c-bets like 70% on the flop, then it drops down to 30% on the turn. These are perfect players to target. But time down. Make sure you time down. You want to make it look like you're considering how to extract max value with your strong flopped hand. I know you want to support the show, and one way you can do so is by visiting today's sponsor, Habwin.com. Habwin, Habwin.com. I know that you like online poker, just like me. What if you could win prizes at zero cost? Well, with Habwin, you can play free, exclusive $100 free rolls on Party Poker and BWin. Check out our winter free rolls every Sunday at 8 p.m. Central European Time. It's your chance to jump at the opportunity to win extra cash completely for free. Register now at www.habwin.com/free rolls to start the fun. So if you can play on Party Poker or BWin, support the show by visiting Habwin and registering for free. Once again, that's www.habwin.com/free rolls. Just in time for the new year, I'm offering my first 4 webinars as one value-packed bundle. You can view the bundle with all of its goodies by going to www.smartpokerstudy.com/4webinars. That's the number 4 webinars. And so the 4 webinars included are the Expert Hand Reading webinar, Rejamming Like a Boss webinar, Opponent Destruction webinar, and the Getting Aggressive webinar. On top of the webinars, you get all the bonus items that originally came with each. So, all in all, you'll receive 19 items, 4 webinars for over 6.5 hours of quality poker strategy content, 4 sets of PDF webinar slides, 4 sets of related training videos for nearly 2 hours of quality instruction, 4 themed podcasts for over 1 hour of audio training. You'll also get my cash pre-flop ranges infographic to help you make profitable pre-flop hand selections. You'll get 1 hand reading steps infographic to refer to as you practice your hand reading skills. And you'll get 1 of the opponent destruction webinar handouts to help analyze your opponents off the felt. This is normally priced at $200, but as a year-ending gift to my listeners, I'm offering this to you at only $100. That's a full $100 savings. To get the savings, just use offer code BUNDLE100 at checkout, and that's the number 100, BUNDLE100. But you must purchase before January 2nd at midnight. So visit www.smartpokerstudy.com/4webinars to learn more, and don't forget offer code BUNDLE100 to get $100 off before midnight on January 2nd. Alrighty, back to class, poker people. Cool beans, let's get to some post-flop leaks and let's get to fixing them. The leaks that I'm about to discuss, they can be found through some good old-fashioned filtering in Poker Tracker 4, and that's how I do all of my leak finding. So I've got screenshots of each of these leak finding filters in the show notes to help you out. So leak number 1 is a negative win rate out of position in multi-way pots. So to filter for this, under hand details, select out of position, and also set the players seeing the flop between 3 and 10. And under actions and opportunities pre-flop, select both, posted small blind and posted big blind. Then under flop actions and opportunities, select saw flop. And once again, check out the screenshot if that was a little confusing for you. So this filter shows you how profitable you are when you're playing out of position in multi-way pots. So if this is anything positive, if your win rate is anything positive, that's great. And it could mean a few different things. Number 1, maybe you're getting here with strong hands and you're playing well by extracting value. Number 2, it could mean you're considering your opponents and the board and you're making successful bluffs. Or number 3, it could mean that you're ditching all but your strong hands and strongest draws and only staying in when it's positive EV to do so. And number 4, of course, it could be a combination of all 3 of those things. But if your win rate with this filter is negative, it could mean you've got a couple of leaks, but they should be relatively easy to fix. So the first reason is maybe you're not thinking through your decisions pre-flop and you don't realize how negative EV the situation is. You fix this by asking yourself one simple question before every pre-flop decision. How can I make money with this hand in this position against these players? If you can't think of a way to make money other than hitting a miracle flop, then you're better off just ditching the hand. So another leak might be that you're staying in post-flop with weak hands and draws. You fix this by not being afraid to ditch those top pair weak kicker hands or those low flush draws and weak straight draws. Lots of players, they don't want to look weak to their opponents, and they stay in way too long by calling too wide or pushing their bluffs too hard. If it doesn't look profitable, don't flounder, just fold. Alrighty, so leak number 2 is losing money post-flop when you're heads up and out of position. So the filter for this, under hand details, select out of position, and also set the players seeing the flop to between 2 and 2, so you're heads up. Under actions and opportunities pre-flop, filter for posted small blind and big blind. So this shows you how profitable you are heads up out of position. If it's positive, once again, that's great. But go ahead and take a look at your biggest losing hands and see if there are some things that you could have done better. If your win rate is negative, though, there are 2 common causes for this. Cause number 1 is that you don't like to give up post-flop versus just one other player. So many of us feel that folding on the flop to just a single bet versus one villain means that we're weak and our opponents will walk all over us. Well, this isn't the case at all, as long as you're folding when it makes sense to do so. Think about your options and the plays that we've discussed today. A check raise, a donk lead, or that out of position flop float. If you do it timely and do it against the right opponents, those could win you the pot. And the second cause for this leak could be that you're too passive or you're too aggressive with your marginal hands and draws. So only continue beyond the flop with good hands, good draws, or a compelling reason to do so, like you see a good bluff opportunity on a future street. Okay, so leak number 3 is losing when calling on the flop. So under actions and opportunities pre-flop, filter for posted small blind and big blind. And under actions and opportunities on the flop, filter for any flop call. So this will tell you if you're making good flop calls. A negative win rate here is really bad, but you can fix this. There's 2 ways to fix it here. First, review all of your losing hands, and I do mean all of your losing hands in this filter. You might be surprised to see how many small 8 to 12 blind pots that you've lost. This might not sound like a lot, but a pre-flop call and a call on the flop could easily be between 8 to 12 big blinds, and lots of those smallish losing pots equals one big hit to your win rate. So you need to see what types of marginal hands and draws and situations that you're calling in, take note of what stands out to you, and commit to not making those calling mistakes again. The second thing you've got to do is sort the hands that are returned in the filter, sort them by card strength. Take a look and see how many offsuit broadways, how many crappy aces and offsuit connectors and offsuit gappers you're calling with. Also, look for the crappy suited cards as well. If you're calling pre-flop with a lot of ace 6 offsuit, 9-8 off, king 10 offsuit, jack 7 suited, or king 8 suited hands, then you've got to tighten up pre-flop to make for better post-flop situations. Remember, you're going to be out of position, so choose hands that flop well and are easy to play. And as a bonus for listeners who take the initiative to check out the show notes, I've only discussed 3 leaks here, but there are 2 more at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod113. So go to those show notes and check out those additional 2 leaks I put there. I wonder what they could be. Challenge! Here's my challenge to you for this episode. Run all of the leak finding filters just mentioned and the 2 in the show notes, because it's very likely at least one of them will show a negative big blind per 100 hands win rate. Choose the most costly leak to fix this week. Review every one of the losing hands and try to figure out what you're doing wrong. Are your pre-flop hand selections good? Are you taking into account all the info available to you to make solid post-flop choices? Are you taking into account the opponent, their range, the strength of your hand, and how you can likely make money in this spot? Resolve to focus on this leak with each session that you play this week, and review any applicable hands the following day to determine if you're making better decisions or not. Now it's your turn to take action and do something positive for your poker game.
Now get it on.
Thank you so much for listening today. I want your feedback, so hit me with it through the show notes, or you can also send an email to sky@smartpokerstudy.com, tweet me @smartpokerstudy, or post in the Facebook group at www.smartpokerstudy.com/discuss. Alrighty, poker people, be sure to come back next week for a special episode in honor of January's Patreon theme of Mashing the Micros. And of course, I want to thank our show sponsor today, habwin.com. Check out their winter free rolls every Sunday, 8 p.m. Central European Time. Visit www.habwin.com/free rolls to learn more and to register for free. And don't forget to get my 4-webinar bundle by heading over to www.smartpokerstudy.com/4webinars and using offer code BUNDLE100 to get $100 off. Word of mouth is the best advertising, and thank you so much for sharing the show with other poker people. Your sharing and caring is what helps us grow. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.